Hi, welcome back to the Connected Realms podcast. This is episode 5, chapter 5 of the book Vampires Are. This is the most interesting chapter of the entire book. This is where we meet Elizabeth, who says that she is a 439-year-old vampire. At first, Kaplan thought that he was receiving a prank call, but the more Kaplan questioned her and the more his team questioned her over a period of 6 months in extremely lengthy 3-hour-long interviews, the more they were convinced that they could really be dealing with a vampire. And that's because her answers were extremely detailed, precise, consistent, and it tracks with history and what we know vampires might actually be like. There are a lot of separate interviews in this chapter, and it is very lengthy. What I'm going to attempt to do is put this together chronologically from the beginning of when Elizabeth came to be a vampire until now, and then describe how she lives nowadays. Around age 17 or 18, around the year 1540 in England, Elizabeth got turned into a vampire. She wound up in the Tower of London because she was caught up in that era of English history where it was first illegal to be a Catholic, then illegal to be a Protestant, then illegal to be a Catholic again, then illegal to be a Protestant again. Really depended on the mood of whatever Tudor was on the throne at that time. She was thrown into the Tower of London to be beheaded because she was found to be a Protestant, and what you were supposed to be on that day was a Catholic. She mentioned she had also been practicing witchcraft, but she did not say that that was the reason she wound up in the Tower of London. It was because of the Protestantism. So then she says a man named Michael leaped through the window in her prison cell and turned her into a vampire. And the way she phrases the turning is very interesting. She calls it the vicissitudes. And I had to look that word up. What it translates to at first, like the first definitions you get are things like a sort of transformation or going from one thing to an opposing thing. But the actual Latin word for it just means the turning. I find that very interesting because these days in modern English, we call it colloquially getting turned when somebody goes from being a human to a vampire. So the facts that we've got so far is that she was a human. She got turned into a vampire. It was when she was in the Tower of London being beheaded for practicing the wrong religion. The man who turned her was someone named Michael. She did not know him before that. He also brought a relative of his, and they did this together to her. So at first, she doesn't want to talk about what this process was like, but they do eventually ask her more and more questions about this specific process of getting turned. She says that it was like a cult back then, and she differentiates that from now, meaning it must be much less of a cult type thing now. So she said they came in and dressed her in a white dress, and then they lit 17 candles, and she believes that's because they thought that she was 17 years old. And then they put her in a room for 3 days where she couldn't eat anything, and she just had to sit there. Then she had to go and find Michael, and it took her a while to find him. And then he cut her wrist with a knife. And interestingly, he drank her blood, allowed it to probably mix with his, and then he had her drink the blood out of his wrist. And at that point, she passed out, and she doesn't remember a lot, but when she woke up, essentially, she was a vampire. She had to undergo training. She had to definitely practice drinking the blood of animals, but I believe she had to practice killing them as well, because she says she had to graduate from small animals to animals as large as cattle to learn how it's done. Now, all she drinks is human blood. She does not drink animal blood, and she drinks a ton of human blood. She basically has to consume enough blood from one human body every single day. I will get to that more when we talk about what her lifestyle is like now, but she only drinks human blood. She spent about 305 years with Michael, living in various countries, including France and America. There might have been others. She kind of implied that, but she did not list them. She spent about 305 years with Michael, at which point they separated because they were simply sick of each other, and it was mutual and it was amicable. There was not like a romantic relationship between her and Michael. They were just companions traveling the world, and he was training her for a while on how to hunt, and they were probably sharing each other's human bodies. Eventually, she found her way to America. She moved here in the year 1775, just before the Revolutionary War. She came on a boat that she believes was called the Farragut, Farragut. She says it was a very uncomfortable ride. And she doesn't talk too much about where she lived between 1775 and present day, but now she lives in Florida. However, she spent about 17 years before living in Florida, living in Indiana. Now, I found this supremely interesting because Indiana happens to be a very random, concentrated area in the U.S. for specific high strangeness. That specific high strangeness is people who say they transform into werewolves and vampires. There are not many other states you can say this about, and this is a random thing I stumbled upon in my own research separate from this book. So the fact that she names Indiana as a state that she lived in, paired with the reality that Indiana is a place you would never guess as being riddled with vampire and werewolf activity, that to me is significant because it says she's probably telling some kind of truth here. Now that she lives in Florida, she has not seen Michael. It seems like she saw him on and off after they separated, but she has not seen him since about 1927. There is one other vampire that she has encountered recently. She says she tries not to be around vampires, and they really don't try to live near one another or with one another. It seems like they don't really like to be around each other. Her opinion is that vampires are very neurotic. It sounds like she's actually just annoyed by the types of people that they are. And she acknowledges that she is very neurotic as well. So it sounds like being a vampire is a very solitary lifestyle. And it also might be possible that they don't want someone getting in their way, either getting in the way of their food supply, getting in the way of them trying to remain private. So in terms of where vampires are sort of concentrated now, it sounds like as of 1979, there were 2 in Florida. She seemed to know that it was her and this guy she called Joaquin. She said they ran into each other one day. They were totally shocked to see one another. They hadn't seen each other since many years ago in France. And they sort of did a double take and looked at each other. They did not talk to each other. And she says, he stays in his half of Florida and I stay in my half. She does imply that she lives in the northern area of Florida, and she says that she has a large triangle that she works in, meaning hunting humans. And if I put the pieces together, it seems like that triangle probably spans from northeastern Florida, so say Jacksonville, St. Augustine type area, somewhere over to the Panhandle, say Tallahassee area, and down toward probably Ocala, Gainesville. That's my best guess in terms of how she described the 3 houses that she has in Florida and what that affords her in terms of geography to hunt humans. So now we'll move into what is her day-to-day life like? So it's very solitary. She does not spend a lot of time with humans, and she does not spend any time with vampires. She does not like humans. She thinks that they're stupid, and because she thinks they're so stupid, it seems she has a distinct lack of pity for them when they die at her own hand. She is bodying about 1 person to 2 people every single day. She averages 10 per week. She says outright that she does kill her victims. She remained tight-lipped about this in general, but she described 1 or 2 instances of her kills. One was she drained the person in their car and then put his corpse's foot on the pedal of the car and let it drive into a lake, and she finished with, and he still hasn't been found. And then another one she did not detail as thoroughly, but she was driving in her own car. She got held up by a guy with a gun who got in and said, drive, and who knows what he was planning to do with her, but she finished him off. Kaplan was disturbed by this, so disturbed that he wanted to gather enough details to call the cops on her. Interestingly, Elizabeth did mention in one of these random interviews in passing that she had taken a vacation during the winter of 1977 to Nova Scotia. And Kaplan looked through his records and saw that he had a vampire attack report from Nova Scotia in the winter of 1977. So he wonders if it was her. So she does hang out with one human being in her day-to-day life, and that is someone that she calls her secretary. It's a human. She calls this secretary the intended of the other vampire Joaquim in Florida. This seems to mean that this woman is a human who is going to be turned into a vampire. She's like 20 years old, so she's young enough. And this human woman knows that Elizabeth is a vampire, and she also seems to share the same disdain for humans. She also thinks that humans are stupid, but she does the bidding of Elizabeth in terms of day-to-day life stuff. So Elizabeth registers her cars under fake names. This woman helps with that. When Elizabeth sends or receives mail, it bounces around to wildly different addresses across the US before the secretary finally gets it somewhere else and brings it to Elizabeth. Elizabeth has several passports for several countries. She has to keep up with changing those passports because the people that they represent die over time. So this secretary seems to help with those sorts of logistics. Now, Elizabeth, in terms of how she makes money, all she says is that she has a lot of real estate and it brings in a lot of money. Her hobbies kind of make it seem like she is a woman from the year 1550 because she likes to sew and paint and read. She occasionally slips into an English accent from what Kaplan calls an American Midwestern / Southern accent. I don't know what that means because I have like a Midwestern type and I live among people with Southern accents. Never shall the two meet, right? So I don't know what a Midwestern / Southern accent is. That to me seems indicative of somebody trying to put on an American accent and not understanding. I have heard American actors do this when they're trying to put on an English accent. They will talk sort of like a Londoner, but also sort of like someone from up in like the Chester, like Northeast area. Wildly different accents, but they don't know that and they don't have an ear for it. So anyway, I find the accent thing interesting because when Elizabeth is becoming excited about something, or if she is speaking about her time spent in England way back when, she is slipping into an English accent. And Kaplan and his team even ask her directly about this, like, hey, why is it sometimes you're like speaking with an English accent? And she's like, well, I mean, that's how I learned to speak. And it depends on who I'm speaking with or what I'm talking about. And I do find that to be true. I'm generally pretty good with language and accents and linguistics. It is true that people are directly influenced to have an accent by where they live, even if they're traveling. Like I've heard Americans go to France and all of a sudden they're kind of like speaking with a weird French accent after a while because that's all they're hearing. My grandmother was from England, but spent half her life here and half her life there. And I would hear her become more American sounding the longer she spent time here, but more English sounding as soon as she went back to England or things like this. Say I go to Wisconsin or something like that, I start speaking with much more of that native accent that I have, which I've tried to get rid of. But when I'm among people who have that accent, it just comes right out of me, right? So I understand that what she's saying actually has a lot of truth to it in terms of the accent. So they questioned it, and I was really interested in that part of it because I believe it adds to the validity of what she's saying and who she is. Now, in terms of writing, it got interesting because she wrote a quick letter to Kaplan on something that she sent him. He got her to send some mail, and I will include a photo of the writing. He calls it calligraphy, and he asks her if she's ever learned calligraphy. And she's like, no, that's just how I write. And it's a very kind of old, beautiful handwriting. It's very hard to read. If you are like Gen Z or younger, you ain't going to be able to read it because it's very ornate cursive. And the way she signs her signature is straight up the way a signature would have been signed in the 1500s. It is uncanny, actually. And I only know this because I have a weird fascination with British history from the years about 1200 to 1800. Anywhere in there, I'm hooked. I'm reading about it, and I've seen a lot of handwriting from back then. Her signature looks exactly like a signature would look from somebody who lived in England in the 1500s and could write. So I'm including a picture of that. And I will read an excerpt from the handwriting as well, just in case you can't. It says, I never do anything on the spur of the moment. I have not lived this long by being careless or impulsive. I must feel secure. And I give you my word that so long as I do not believe you to have sacrificed my own security in any way, I will never so much as raise my voice to you. This promise I make that you may be as comfortable as possible. Elizabeth was writing this to Kaplan because she was sending him some things, which I wish that he included these and he didn't. She was sending him photos of people that she had known over the past couple hundred years. She was sending him a painting that she had made. She sent him clothing she had sewn, some humorous items, which he doesn't specify, and then a blueprint and specifications for the custom, quote, sleeper she had made, which she insists is not like a coffin, but it is an enclosed bed made with very ornate wood and metal. She actually has calligraphy written on it. And I find this so intriguing. She says that there's a brass band on the sleeper and there are hieroglyphics carved into it from the Book of the Dead, the Papyrus of Ani, A-N-I. I don't know what that is, but I'm going to look it up really quickly. Now, the internet says the Papyrus of Ani is a papyrus manuscript in the form of a scroll with cursive hieroglyphs and color illustrations that was created in 1250 BCE during the 19th dynasty of New Kingdom of Ancient Egypt. Egyptians compiled an individualized book for certain people upon their death called the Book of Going Forth by Day, more commonly known as Book of the Dead, and typically containing declarations and spells to help the deceased in their afterlife. The Papyrus of Ani is the manuscript compiled for the Theban scribe Ani. It is now in the British Museum. I'm going to have to look more into this Papyrus of Ani and what it actually means, but if this is tied to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, then it is possible that there is some connection here between vampirism and ancient Egyptian gods, which ancient Egyptian gods are no joke. They still are kicking around today. People still evoke them by doing magic and curses and spells, and it's never nice. It is always nasty. People who have Anubis following them around don't have a good time. I have heard more than a few stories of people thinking that an Egyptian god is following them around and it destroys their life, and sometimes people even die. So that seems dark. That seems random. That seems weird. So very interesting connection that she makes there between Egyptian sort of magic and vampirism. But there is no elaboration on this. Now, in terms of what her lifestyle is like, she drinks roughly 6 quarts of blood a day, which is roughly how much is found in the human body. She says she finishes drinking blood mostly when she's full. She says she finishes drinking blood from her victim when they die. So Kaplan had really struggled with, well, what happens when the blood starts to coagulate? Do you have some kind of method to deal with that? And she laughed at him as if he were stupid. But later on, she went on to specify that she stops drinking the blood when the person is dead. So that kind of seems to me that she's drinking the blood while it's still in its liquid state. She stops drinking it before it begins to coagulate. The person's already dead. Interesting that she stops when they're dead because it means their life force is gone. Obviously, blood is part of the life force, but it means their soul is gone. And she does go on to say, unprompted, that she doesn't really feel too bad for killing people because it's not like she's impacting their soul or where their soul goes after they die. She's just taking them out sort of like a car accident would. I found that very interesting. She does acknowledge that we have souls. And she kind of implies that she might not be in that same category anymore now that she's not a human. And it seems to bother her a little bit, or at least contribute a lot to her sense of loneliness and isolation. When she sleeps, it's more a form of hibernation for her than human sleep. So she differentiates the two. She says she cannot turn into a bat and thinks that that's ridiculous nonsense. She does have very normal teeth. They're very, very white. She only has 22 teeth when most people have 32. I have 27. I mean, I had a lot of teeth removed because I have a small mouth and big molars and whatever. I mean, Kaplan was bothered by the fact that she only had 22 teeth, but she's a very small person too. She's 5'2", and she doesn't weigh a lot. So If she's a small person, it's possible she just had a bunch of teeth removed because there was no room for them in her mouth. I mean, that's pretty normal. Although in the 1970s, I'm not sure how normal that would have been. Anyway, she does have what we would call fangs. She hates to call them fangs, but she says they're just slightly longer teeth. She doesn't even say that they're pointy, but she does say that she uses them for getting blood sometimes. Usually she uses a straight razor. Sometimes she uses her teeth the old school way. So she does sleep all day. She laments about how hard it is to wake up after it's already become dark and get showered and dressed in time to make it to the shops before they close. But then she goes on to say that she hunts at night and she hunts in a different spot every night. And she does a combination of driving and walking until she finds her victim. She prefers tourists because those are the people who won't be missed for a while. She doesn't prefer men to women or any age group. She does not say that she ever does this to children, but she doesn't say that they're exempt either. She does refuse to answer quite a few questions from Kaplan if it has any chance of revealing her identity. She's very, very, very concerned with that, which tracks with the other people that Kaplan has interviewed saying that they are vampires too. She does say that she is among the oldest that she knows of, and she only thinks that anywhere from 12 to 50 vampires exist in the United States at the time she was interviewed. She says, if Michael and his cousin are still alive, they are older than I am. And then pretty much everyone I know of that's a vampire today is significantly younger than me. They don't ask her about this, but she does imply that these vampires die. She doesn't say how. Interestingly, she does straight out say that they don't get sick, they don't need doctor's visits, they don't really have conditions that plague us, and she doesn't seem to know how that works. She cannot eat if she is full. If she tries to eat when she's full, what happens is she gets a pain in the right-hand side of her body for 18 hours, and then it subsides, and then she only eats when she's hungry. That was interesting to me physiologically because it means that probably the blood is getting stuffed or caught somewhere in the digestive tract, wherever it's processing in the body. And on the right-hand side of your body, the organs that would be affected are the pancreas, right-hand kidney, gallbladder, liver, and intestines. I think she's probably feeling pain in either her pancreas, gallbladder, liver, or intestinal tract. I don't think in the kidney because I've had kidney pain and that doesn't feel like it's in your side. It feels like it's in your back. So if all she's drinking is human blood and she drinks more than she needs to, it causes her pain in one of her organs. When she drinks the blood, this is a very interesting description. Before she drinks blood, if she starts getting hungry, she's very irritable, her heart rate increases, and she starts to get more attuned and sensitive to sights and sounds. So it's like her body just starts kind of tweaking a little bit, like becoming very, very hangry, I guess is how you would describe it. Interesting what she says about sounds getting louder and sights getting sharper. It's like her body is going into full-blown hunting mode. So she's a predator. While she's drinking blood, she says it takes her about 20-25 minutes to completely have her fill. While she's drinking blood, what she feels is that her feet go cold and her mind sort of goes blank, and she describes it like this. She says, you know how when you're at the height of a yawn, it just feels very intense for just a second? It's like that for the whole 25 minutes. That was an intriguing way to describe what she's feeling. And then after the fact, when she's done eating, she feels incredibly strong. And she implies that she's incredibly fast and strong. She says she can run up to 30 miles an hour and she can sustain it depending on why she's running that fast. So she can keep up with a car that's going that fast. And she told Kaplan if she backhanded him, it would break his neck and kill him. She's 5'2". There's nothing I cannot backhand a fly and kill it. Okay. I'm shorter than that, but there's nothing that I can backhand and it hurts. If she can backhand a full grown man and kill him, she's incredibly strong. This bothered me because I couldn't understand it. I am going to recite it. I cannot understand it. When talking about her state of before, during, and after eating, Kaplan goes, "What's your state now?" And she says, "Medium." I was taught the finger method. What you do is hold your hands up, fingers and thumb outstretched. The tallest finger of the left hand is 0. The tallest finger of the right hand is 100. And then I do it by my feelings now, but what you do is if it's been, say, 16 hours, you count back 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and then you know if you need blood or not. It was part of my training. I could not understand that. I put my fingers up and I counted, and that doesn't make any sense to me. If you can make sense of that, please leave a comment or email me, connectedrealms@proton.me. I would love to know what that means. So it gets real interesting when Elizabeth starts talking about the differences between humans and vampires. First of all, she talks about being turned and what that kind of meant and what that process seemed to be for her. Along with doing like a full-on double blood transfusion process, Elizabeth said, "It's just a theory, but I think there's something in the blood of the vampire, maybe transmitted by the bite, that is capable of making another vampire under the right conditions. Just like the sexual act is capable of producing a baby, but doesn't always, so the vampire bite may be capable of producing another vampire because of whatever is released into the blood." So that's interesting. It sounds like she's saying, hey, you can perform this ritual a bunch of times and it doesn't always result in somebody becoming a vampire. Because that's exactly what happens when you perform the act of making a baby. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the conditions, if the conditions are right and if the body is able to support that. So, along with that, some of the differences are vampires have a much lower body temperature. So she says that vampires don't have any sexual relationships or even romantic relationships because there is no inclination. And she asks Kaplan if he's ever met somebody who says he's a male vampire, but he's fathered a child, because as far as she's aware, vampiric men cannot father children. Their body temperature is too low to support having a sperm count. Now, she calls this impotence, and I don't know if she means just impotent as in cannot create a baby or impotent also as in cannot perform sexually, because this would directly contradict all these other people saying they're real vampires and the way they get away with it is by having these sort of BDSM agreements with people so they can get their blood and they just trade sexual favors for it. It makes you wonder, okay, so is what they're doing all an act if they're impotent and they don't even want a romantic or sexual relationship with someone? Or are those people just humans being real posers and they're not vampires at all? Because Elizabeth scoffs at the idea of having living donors and she scoffs at the idea of having any sort of romantic or sexual relationship. She also clams up and refuses to talk about it, which would be another indicator that perhaps she really is this Elizabethan era English woman, because that sort of modesty would prevail even as she ages hundreds of years. Other differences between humans and vampires, the eyes. So Elizabeth said in general, her appearance could give her away, but she doesn't let people stare at her long enough. She says her hair, skin, and eyes are different. Her skin is very pale, and she tells people that she's albino because it must be getting their attention. And her eyes, if you stare at them, they look more crystalline or like broken glass. I found that very interesting because that is one of the ways you can tell that a cat is a senior cat instead of like a younger middle-aged cat, because their eyes start to look more like broken glass in a really pretty way for cats. I don't know what Elizabeth is talking about with her own eyes because she wouldn't provide photos of anything, but she says that she believes that her eyes literally are comprised of some sort of crystal or metal because it looks like that. So she also indicates when light shines into her eyes and reflects back, it looks a lot different than human eyes. And she compared this by saying, think of if you shine a flashlight through a piece of cloth versus if you shine it at a piece of metal. That's the difference between a human's eyes and my eyes. And I've always found it interesting. She also thinks that her eyes literally, she described them as lead crystal. I had to look that up as well. I didn't know what lead crystal was. Lead crystal looks like a really old school, very fancy type of glass that you would drink out of. And her describing her eyes as looking like that just gave me a really precise visual. And she says that she thinks that whatever makes up specifically her irises has something to do with the fact that she can see in incredible detail, almost like a hawk or an eagle. She said if she stares at a dollar bill from 50 yards out, she can see every little line and read every little letter on it. So she has much better hearing and eyesight than humans do, which again would make her excellent as a predator or a hunter. So, another big difference between humans and vampires is the aging process in general. Elizabeth says you cannot turn someone into a vampire if they're past the age of about 30, because past then, their cells are dying too quickly for this process to be able to hold. And actually, if you turn someone, or in her words, give them the vicissitudes after a certain age, they actually will die within about 5 years of that happening to them. So something about the body just, like, cannot handle it. She said they prefer to turn people who are, like, the age range of something like 18 to 24. They really don't wanna mess with you before or after that. She doesn't go into if someone's too young, but she definitely dwells on people being too old for this. Beyond that, contrary to humans who get slower and weaker with age, vampires get faster and stronger as they age as long as they keep up with proper blood drinking. If they don't keep up with their physical needs enough, they will deteriorate and it sounds like kind of just die off like the rest of us. But if they do keep up with their needs like she does, where she's out getting bodies each and every night of the week, then you get faster and stronger with age. Now, in terms of types of vampires, she does say that she only knows vampires that are her race. When she is asked to elaborate on race, it seems like she does not mean race the way that we mean it. Like, oh, we're all, the same exact species. Some of us are black, some of us are white, some of us are Asian. She doesn't mean race like that. She seems to mean race as in there are vampires that are of the human looking race, and there are vampires that are not human looking. This tracks very well with what I have learned separately and recently in terms of types of vampire species which might exist. It could be one of these complex things with vampires that they're not just one thing. To be vampiric is simply to really want to just drink human blood to survive. What Kaplan's understanding is like, okay, you have this like lowest tier people who cosplay like vampires. Then you have people who truly think and behave like vampires. They drink a little blood every day, but they also eat normal food. They do normal things and they live their day to day lives. They have names, they have social security numbers, they have jobs. But then there's this other class, like Elizabeth is in a class of her own in terms of Kaplan's research, but there are apparently more out there like her where she only drinks human blood. She drinks a ton of it. She drinks a body's worth every single day of her life. She has to have it. And if she does, she gets faster and stronger as she ages. And she looks like a human. It could very well be that there are these other types of Nosferatu type vampires or even like gargoyle looking vampires that live underground. They either live in cave systems or they just live in the inner earth. And they're more like huge winged animals that fly around. I mean, when I hear those stories, they're hunting humans and animals alike, but humans must be the primary source of blood for anything that's a vampire. So very interesting that she differentiates here between races of vampire because, like I said, it really tracks with other research on this topic indicating that there's human-looking vampires, and she's saying, yeah, we look human, but we're not human. The human-looking vampires are still male and female, even though they are totally asexual. Like, if you're totally asexual, there's no reason for you to look male or female in the animal world. And she says, well, it's because this is just how we looked and how we were built at the time we were turned into a vampire. Interesting, because if she looked like a freaking octopus at the time that she was turned into a vampire, it seems like she would maintain that whole appearance, but she would just be wanting to eat blood after that and not really be tolerant to light. And of course, Elizabeth's top concern above all else is not being found out, not being identified. She does go out of her way to not let Kaplan know where she lives, what her name is. I mean, it sounds like she has many names, but she does not want him to have enough information for her to get caught. And she keeps reiterating that she's lived this long, not getting caught. And it's because she doesn't slip up and do stupid stuff like trust someone for too long. She does say that Kaplan is the first human that she's been able to speak to at length like this. It seems like she very much keeps to herself, that she can't relate to humans. She doesn't understand them. She doesn't understand how they feel about her or her kind. She doesn't understand how they feel about most things. And she doesn't want to get caught, right? And executed. So she just doesn't spend any time with humans, but she is enjoying speaking to Kaplan because he's an intellectual. So she doesn't find him stupid, although she frequently says that he has stupid questions. She seems to just like having his company. And she says specifically that the reason she has done all these interviews is because it's nice to speak to a human who can understand what she is but won't condemn her for it. So it seems like there's still some human element in a vampire that yearns for acceptance and understanding, even though they're never going to get it from humans. So I didn't know where to fit this. So I'm just going to fit this between talking about the differences between humans and vampires and talking about how the interviews ended. At some point, Elizabeth says that she also got in trouble in England for practicing witchcraft. Kaplan asks her details about this, and in all his academic arrogance, he actually had the nerve to say that he thinks she was full of it when she was talking about this because he knows more about witchcraft in 1500s England than she does. And I just found this to be such an absurd example of how academics really insulate themselves. They really live in a bubble of reality where they think that what they read in a book is the truth. I don't live in that reality, okay? Like anything you read in a book could be outright lies or propaganda, especially a history book about witchcraft. So he literally says, I have read about witchcraft and studied it. I know what I'm talking about, and she doesn't know what she's talking about. So I think that this part of it was not the truth. And it's like, who are you? Kaplan, you live in 1979 in America. You don't live in 1500s England. Everything else that she has told you supports the notion that she did live in that time, in that place. This is the one thing where she's saying something that you don't know to be true, but in all your academic arrogance, you completely dismiss it because what you read in a book doesn't match up with what she says. And she even kind of says something like that. She's like, I don't know what to tell you. This is my experience. This is what I lived. What I was doing at the time, I was told that was witchcraft. If that doesn't line up with what your book tells you now about what witchcraft was back then, I don't know what to say. I don't know why I got so pissed off reading that, but I did because I'm like, Kaplan, in all this incredibly valuable information that you are providing us, what are you missing when you are exhibiting that level of arrogance that only academics can exhibit? You know, they just drive me nuts. Like if you ask a modern day Egyptologist about Egypt and about something, you know, that we don't even know how the pyramids are built, but they will act like they know for sure as if they were there in ancient Egypt living and breathing. They will act that confident about what they tell you about how the people lived back then and how things were done. And it's like, no, there's so much that we don't know. And there's so many lies that we've been told on that one topic alone. I don't understand why it doesn't occur to academics that what they read in some silly book could be wrong. Or there could be more to it than what they were told. I don't know. His dismissal of that was just ridiculous. So this series of interviews abruptly ended. Essentially, Elizabeth saw Kaplan on TV. He randomly went on NBC and had an interview about the kind of work that he did. Something about that interview spooked Elizabeth because she called him in the middle of the night suddenly saying, hey, everything I ever told you, just never mind. I was lying. I'm a hoax. Just call me a hoax. And I don't want to talk anymore. He gets on the phone with her and presses her like, hey, what is this all about? Are you really lying or like what's going on? And she's like, either I'm lying about what I said all along or I'm lying about being a hoax. But either way, I've told you the truth. She's like being really cryptic like that. Long story short, they go round and round in circles about are you lying or are you not? And what are you lying about? And it seems like she got spooked by him doing that interview, potentially being able to reveal who she is or get close to knowing who she is. And she just wanted to back out entirely and call it quits. So she was calling to just say, well, I'm saying I'm a hoax, but it seems like the truth was she was telling him her truth all along. And the lie is this very short conversation where she's saying, I'm a hoax. I'm a hoax. Just, whatever you have to believe, just believe that and call me a hoax. So Kaplan leaves this conversation basically believing that everything she had said heretofore was true, that she was just trying to squirm out of any further interviews by saying she was lying, and he never heard from her again. And so this kind of tracks with all the other instances of legitimate vampires that he seemed to have interviewed. They all do this thing where they kind of spill their guts and then they suddenly get spooked and say, never mind, don't listen to me. And then he never hears from them again. So that's it for Elizabeth. That's the end of the chapter. Tell me, what do you think? Do you think she was a real vampire? Do you think she lived as long as she says she's lived? Do you think she's still living here in Florida? I mean, I'm kind of scared. I wonder if I live more near her or more near Joaquin, and if they're still here, still alive. Do you think you've met a vampire? Apparently, they're out there killing people each and every day. So these are forces to be reckoned with if they truly exist. Interesting that it seems like there's more than one species of vampire, more than one race, as they call it. So I was captivated by this chapter. Tell me what you thought about it. Tell me, do you think she's full of it? Do you think this is real? I want to hear all your thoughts. So leave a comment and let me know. The next chapter will be talking about whether or not you are a vampire, and it'll give us some quizzes. So stay tuned for that one. I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for listening.